Welcome to Tempe Accelerates. Today we are very pleased to have representatives from the police department here to speak to performance measure 1.12 regarding clearance rates and solving crimes. I'm going to turn it over to them in just a second, but again a reminder to fill out the forms in the back of the room for comments that may not be made to them in the question period after their presentation. And we will, our next scheduled Tempe Accelerates is May 10th. So we do not have one on May 3rd, but we will be back with two on May 10th. So without further ado, gentlemen.
Thanks. Does the slideshow come up? Thank you. Hi, my name is Noah Fritz. I'm here representing the Tempe Police Department with my friend and colleague, Commander Mike Cooley. We're pleased and honored to be here representing the department, Chief Moyer, our co-workers, to talk to you a little bit about performance measure 1.12 or 1.12 clearance rates. It ultimately begins with our mission at the police department, where we reduce harm in Tempe by preventing crime, fighting crime, and clearing cases. The measure itself is articulated as achieve a clearance rate of violent crime cases greater than the national 5-year average or equal to for cities of our population size. Clearance rates are used to measure the percentage of crimes solved by the police.
So we're happy to be here. We want to hopefully help educate you guys, understand a little bit some of the things we do as a police department, our mission, some of the things that are challenging to us, and hopefully you can help us come up with some really good ideas. So what you're going to first see, what we hope to get out of this presentation is what is the FBI UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting? What is that? Hopefully by the end of this, you'll be experts and can go and talk about it over dinner tonight. Also, what we're hoping you get out of this is what is the official FBI UCR clearance rates and strategies and successes that we've seen in the police department and challenges that we see as well. And hopefully that's something you guys get out of. Some of the background. So UCR crime, it's broken up kind of into two categories. You got your violent crime, which is the things that really get media attention or get attention from people. It's crimes of violence, things that pull at our heartstrings, things that are murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault. So those are your one type of crime, the crime that you see that people are afraid of. The other type of crime is the property crime. Property crime is more of, it's a big deal, but it's more of a nuisance, where you're really dealing with people that are doing burglaries, larceny theft, motor vehicle theft, and this is one of the pieces of crime that we really get asked quite a bit about.
So how's the UCR crime calculated? How do we go about doing that? Well, it begins with citizens reporting a crime to the police department. If a citizen doesn't call 911 and report it, we don't know about it, and it doesn't get counted in this measure or in our federal statistics. So once they submit a crime and we take a report, we then count up and submit the index crimes to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We count all crimes. All crimes in those 8 index crimes are the same when it comes to scoring them or counting them up. A bike theft, in essence, is the same as a homicide. Obviously, a homicide is a felony, could take longer to investigate and things like that, but the statistic itself, those are counted together event by event. So there's one exception to that, and the FBI in their federal regulations talk about what's called the hierarchy rule. So in a single event, you might have multiple crimes committed. An example of that might be where someone breaks into your home, enters your home, steals your flat panel TV and your car keys, and then steals your automobile and drives away. Ultimately, that automobile may be expensive, $10,000, $20,000 vehicle. The TV is less expensive, but because of the hierarchy and the order that you saw those index crimes, they go right in order: murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and then arson. Only those 8 index crimes are tracked by the FBI for crime rate purposes. But in that particular scenario I told you, where it's a burglary and a motor vehicle theft, even though the car costs more, that would get counted only as a burglary. We wouldn't count that under the current rules for 2 crimes. It's 1 crime, 1 event, but multiple crimes there. Hope that makes sense. We can answer questions at the end about that a little more, but it does make the numbers a little more complicated. Secondly, in essence, how do we actually calculate that? It's a pretty simple formula. Then we count up the number of crimes, whether we're talking about all 8 index crimes or we categorize them as violent crime or property crime, but we count those up depending on what we're looking at, and then divide that by the number of residents population, the number of citizens based on the U.S. Census Bureau that live in Tempe, and then multiply that by a rate. And that rate is like miles per hour. In this case, it's by how many residents do we want? Per 10,000 people, per 100,000. Comparing ourselves or how we're using that number. So in 2016, the most recent data that's officially available from the FBI, we take the number of crimes divided by residential population times the rate, and the overall index crime rate then is we had 9,046 Part 1 crimes divided by the estimated population for 2016, about 178,000 people, and then multiply that times the rate of 10,000, and that comes to about 506 crimes, Part 1 crimes, per 100,000, or I'm sorry, per 10,000 residents. The violent crime rate is calculated, again, a little different number. We only calculate the 4 violent crimes, murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault, divide that by the same estimated population for 2016, multiply it times the 10,000 resident rate, and that comes to 51 violent crimes per every 10,000 residents. Make sense? Pretty straightforward formula. In essence, we had 51 for every 10,000 people that live in Tempe, based on the U.S. Census Bureau.
So some of the things that we're going to talk about are what actually influences the crime rate here in Tempe and across the country, actually. It's in law enforcement, a lot of it is the same. A lot of it is what influences this crime, what influences the crime rate, what influences the ability for our officers, for our detectives to go out and solve these crimes. One of the first things that we acknowledge is the confidence in the police department. I can tell you here in the Tempe Police Department, that is one of our primary goals, is to let the community know that we're here, that we care, that we're part of the community. One of the things that help us to understand that is, here's an example. Back in 2013, we had 67 sexual assault reports reported to our police department, 67. Over the next couple of years, we started to see a trend nationally that this was being underreported. The victims weren't coming forth. They were afraid. Sometimes they didn't have confidence in the police department, in the judicial system. They didn't understand what was going to happen. And it really limited the amount of people, the victims, that didn't report these crimes. So what happened is Tempe, as well as several other law enforcement agencies across the country, realized this, and we began doing a big outreach. We have ASU in our backyard. We have the largest public university in the entire country. We understand that a lot of those students are a vulnerable population here that live within our community. We worked very closely with ASU to say, hey, these are some of the things that we want to do when someone is a victim of sexual assault. It's a horrendous crime. It's terrible. It should never happen. But when it does, you have a police department that's here, that's going to listen to you, and that's going to take these crimes serious and go after the suspects in these. So as you can see, with the community outreach, with the public outreach that we did throughout the entire city of Tempe, our numbers began to grow. And in 2017, we had 141 sexual assaults reported. Not that we're proud of that number, but I can tell you, to me, to my colleagues, to the other law enforcement officials, that says a lot to us. That tells us that there are people that are trusting the police department a little bit more. They're trusting that we're going to do what we need to do, that we're going to listen to the victims. And as that happens, we're going to get more crimes reported. These are the types of things we want. Here in the city of Tempe, we want people to understand that Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what you look like, how much money you have, your sexual orientation, your race, your gender, your religion, none of that matters. What matters is you have a law enforcement agency here, the city of Tempe, that you can have confidence in. And we will see numbers like that.
So that satisfaction in the police, that trust in the police really translates into their comfort level of reporting so we can take action and serve them ultimately. Comparing that to a national statistic or average, the National Crime Victimization Survey goes out every year and asks a question, if you're a victim of a crime. We do the same thing in our community survey. And on a national basis, only 51% of violent crimes are reported across the country. That's pretty amazing. Think about that for a second. Well, half of the violent crimes in the United States come to the attention of the police because citizens are willing to call 911. In Tempe, according to our Tempe community survey, we know that 81% of our citizens are satisfied with our police service, and that directly translates to the fact that Tempe residents report 86% of crime to the police. Think about that for a minute, how different that is from, say, the national average in larger cities or other places across the country. If we don't report it, we can't take action. We won't start an investigation. That's a very important comparison, I believe. Ultimately, the third factor that we think is very important for you to be aware of is this concept of daytime population. The U.S. Census Bureau, the last time they measured this was in 2010, showed that Tempe has a daytime increase in population of 46%. Out of all of the valley cities that we are close to here in Maricopa County, we have the largest by far increase in daytime population. The measure is basically who comes to work here. It doesn't measure, and we'll talk about that later, special events or football games, but it's people who come here to work, all right? If you translate that to the year 2016, which is what we're talking about today in terms of our crime and clearance rates, the estimate for Tempe is 178,000 residents, and on a daytime population, that translates to over 260,000 people who come here every day. The difference is night and day. Ultimately, it's the same as hosting an ASU football game every day of the week. Think about that. The people that come here every day, Monday through Friday, could fill up the ASU stadium. That's critical. What are the implications of that? Well, potentially it changes the violent crime rate. We would go from something like 51 crimes per 10,000 people down to 35 crimes per 10,000 people if we use that population at least during the day, okay? More people ultimately means more crime, more opportunity for crime, more vehicles, more laptops, more cell phones that can get stolen, more investigations, which is basically a workload issue for the police department when we talk about clearances and cases.
So as Noah talks about our daytime population, it increases quite a bit, significant amounts. That's one of the things that we want to hit on. But why are people coming to Tempe? We know Tempe is a unique city. Tempe is like no other city in the state of Arizona. And everyone that works there, that lives here, that visits Tempe will tell you that. That's why I work here. I mean, it's a completely different city. Some of the contributing factors is that we got a strong economy. We got people that want to bring their businesses here. The last business survey, I believe, a high amount, I don't remember what it was, 70% of businesses said that they wanted to come to Tempe because they feel safe. They feel safe because of the work that's going on with the entire city, with everybody here. One of the things that you see with a strong economy is because people want to come here. If you look along the Tempe Beach Park, all the buildings that are coming in, the infrastructure that's coming, it's coming. It's here and it's coming more. But people come that don't live here. And that brings the traffic intensity, it brings the influx of jobs, and it brings human beings. Bodies that come into our city every day that are sometimes vulnerable to crime. Sometimes they're vehicles that are parked out in the garage when they drive here. The ones that ride their bikes. There's crime that can happen when there's more people. And that's one thing that we've seen quite a bit throughout my career. I've been here 17 years, and when I started 17 years ago, it was a different city. It was a flat city. Now what we're seeing is the vertical coming up. Those are some of the things we're going to talk about a little bit, is the vertical policing and how does that change things? How are things that we're doing in the police department going to impact crime? How is that going to impact the clearance rates as well? The other thing that we have is ASU, 85,000 students, right? 55,000 of those students are here in the city of Tempe. Every year, we have an influx of brand new freshmen. My son's going to graduate high school next year, and he'll probably be one of those freshmen. Hopefully, he'll be living with mom and dad still, but if not, he'll be living in the dorms, and it'll be the first time he's away from home from us the entire time in his youth, his adult life, I guess. And one of the things that does is that's a vulnerable population. A lot of times, if you drive up and down University, you see the students that are looking on their phones or people that are listening to headphones. This is a population that we're trying to connect with, that we want to understand what are some of the things they need to be aware of. But those are contributing factors here to our crime rate. Some of the other things is we have over 350 special events a year. A lot of those events, if you take, for example, Pat's Run, if you came down here over the weekend, last weekend, we had over 26,000 people that participated in the run. You had an additional probably 20,000 that were spectators or in the area, all having to do with Pat's Run. That's close to over 40,000 people that came to the downtown center of Tempe to participate in an amazing, incredible event. But what that does is that brings in people, a lot of people, human beings, traffic, bicyclists, every form you can think of. We have transit system that runs right through the heart of our city. That brings in human beings. A lot of those people don't live in Tempe, but they come here. So these are contributing factors that we have to take into account as a police department. And law enforcement, some cities don't have to deal with this. Here in Tempe, we deal with it, and I think we deal with it pretty darn good, and hopefully you'll be able to see that here in the next little bit.
So why does that context matter? Why are we so concerned about explaining that to you? One, we want you to understand the impact of those things. But an additional example of that is we consistently see articles that come out on the internet or the newspaper that takes a look at crime and takes a look at clearance rates. One recent article talked about that the most violent city in nearly every U.S. state, according to the FBI. 2 days later, on April 16th, they changed that title to say the FBI data reveals some of the most violent cities in nearly every state. What's ultimately important about that is that the FBI themselves, now I can't see the policy this far away, I'm getting old, clearly states that we provide, when providing agency-oriented stats, the FBI cautions and, in fact, strongly discourages data users against using rankings to evaluate locales and or the effectiveness of local police agencies. Sorry about that. In essence, that policy says we shouldn't use these statistics to compare to other cities. They're recommending against it. They're saying you shouldn't necessarily use it to measure the effectiveness. And the reason is different agencies calculate this differently. Different cities, unlike Tempe, are very different in nature. And it's important for us to take a look at these, use them as a proxy. It's kind of like the warning light in your car. When it goes off, we want to pay attention to it and take a look, but it may be just that we need to do an oil change. It may need that our engine's going to blow up and it's overheating, but it's just an indicator, these metrics, these measures to say, let's take a closer look when these numbers go up or go down. And the FBI clearly states you should be careful when you do that. Ultimately, this article implied that Tempe ranked 34th most violent city across the United States, U.S. states. Ultimately, they make a false attribute that the FBI makes this claim. FBI didn't make this claim. Actually, the FBI is saying don't make this claim. What it is, this particular article is making that claim. Secondly, you need to understand the methodology that was used. That's real critical. One of the things that we know is in that particular example that the two largest cities in Arizona did not report. Tucson and Phoenix were not included in the data that was provided to them and then used in that article. Both of them had higher crime rates than we did and violent crime rates. Secondly, other states had numerous cities with higher rates and underreporting. Finally, it's a fact, when I looked at that data, Tempe is below average for a city our size. we're about average, but we're a little bit below. But the truth is, we're somewhere in the middle. We're not the 34th most dangerous city in the country. So solving crime, getting to the actual metric itself. The council priority measure of clearance rates, 1.12. The calculation for that is it's very simple. You take the number of arrests. It's pretty simple, where we put handcuffs on somebody, possibly where we write a citation, do a cite and release, a summons, and we count those up. Or exceptional clearance rates. There's a couple categories for that. One is when the person goes to another state or goes out of the country and they won't extradite them for one reason or another, but we have probable cause to arrest them. We can count those as a clearance. We have another one where the person might have died during the investigation, or might be part of a suicide murder kind of a deal where we wouldn't arrest them, obviously. We might go where the victim is unwilling to aid in prosecution. So we're not going to have a case to move forward, but we have a probable cause that we know the person. And then finally, if the county attorney's office turns down our plea or our submission to prosecute or to arrest and go forward, we can count all those as what's called an exceptional clearance. So we add all those up very simply and divide that by the total number of crimes. In this case, the total number of violent crimes. So what's that look like? I can't see the chart from here, but in essence, it's 316, for 2016, it's 316 divided by 903 total violent crimes. We cleared 316. In essence, we cleared 35% of our cases in that year. Our target, our goal for accelerates and for the city council priorities is to be at or above the national average, which is 43, almost 44%. Okay? Ultimately, the other point we wanted to make known to people is that not only is that what we're looking at, but we know from prior research in our own department that 61% of the people we arrest are non-Tempe residents. They're coming from outside and coming to Tempe that we deal with and prey on our visitors, on our residents. And we believe that's an important distinction to make as we do our job.
So what do we do about it as a city, as a police department? What do we do about these clearance rates, and how do we get people to help us? How do we get victims to help us? How do we get witnesses, neighbors to help the police department? One of the biggest things is obviously building those relationships, building the relationships within our community. We have a really diverse community here in the city of Tempe. What we also do here in the police department is we're trying to find ways to connect with the community, events, going out, meeting with leaders of the neighborhoods of different religions, different groups that want us to come visit them. There's people that may not want us to come visit with them, but how do we connect with them? We're looking for ways to do that through our recruitment, through our hiring. We're looking for diversity. We're looking for people that typically may not be a police officer. I was never supposed to be a police officer. 17 years later, here I am. And I'm excited about that because Tempe is the one that opened that door for me. There's other people in our community that we're trying to reach to say, hey, help us to become part of the police department. With our caseload management, we have 60 detectives that are assigned to our Criminal Investigations Bureau, roughly 60. These are from your homicide detectives to sex crimes detectives to property detectives. They are the ones that handle all types of the investigations that come from getting your car broken into to somebody getting killed. These detectives, they manage their cases. They have supervision that manages these cases so they don't get overworked. We also have within our investigations, we have our Special Investigations Bureau where we have about 20 detectives that are assigned to this special stuff, narcotics, a couple of other things within the department where they're the ones that help us to solve these crimes, that go out and try to apprehend these criminals. With caseload management, one of the things I wanted to hit on was the quality of reporting. When you have a crime that's committed and it's reported to the police department in a timely manner, we're able to get on that investigation very quickly. We're able to get our assigned and put the resources to it, which is why the caseload management is extremely important. The criminal justice partners, we have several officers that are assigned to different task force, and people may ask, well, why are they assigned to the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force? Well, I'll tell you, when you have special events, when you have the biggest university here, the FBI can provide us a lot of immediate intelligence, information that may be necessary when we're putting these things together. We work with them very closely. We have other task force where we have officers or detectives assigned to it, and they're the ones that help us when we have a criminal that's out there that's a really bad person. We can call the U.S. Marshal Task Force and say, hey, we need some additional help, where they have specialty equipment, they have specialty skills, and more importantly, they can bring in more personnel to dedicate to focus on a violent criminal that had just targeted somebody in our community. So these joint, partnerships, these law enforcement partnerships with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, with the Attorney General's Office, with local departments, the county and state departments that we work with. These relationships are extremely beneficial to the city of Tempe and into solving these crimes, to getting these percentages down. With the crime analysis, we have our Spark unit and our Criminal Intelligence Center, where we have criminal analysts. You know, if you go around, one of the things that Tempe should be very proud of is the analysts, the research that the Tempe Police Department has. We have some of the best analysts, the best you can find. Having talked to other departments, what we have are specialists that when there's a crime pattern, not only are our detectives and our patrol officers out there focusing on that, you have the brains of the department in our intel center that can go through databases and track these criminals down to find patterns to help us solve these crimes. The technology. We're always trying to stay on top of our technology. We're trying to find out what is other agencies using. What technology is the New York Police Department using that can assist us? When it comes to special events, I oversee our special events, that's why I keep hitting on it. But for example, there was a big concert. Some of you may have heard of it, or maybe we were out there. It was called Coachella. I hadn't even heard of it until I read about it. But we saw technology that was being used there to keep this crowd safe. New technology that we've never seen. So the Tempe Police Department had a couple of officers, myself included, that went out there to see what was going on with this technology. How can we bring that to Tempe to keep the guests, the visitors, the tourism, the residents safe when they come to an event like Pat's Run? How can we keep them safe from any terrorist activity, from any lone wolf extremists that may come out and try to make a name for themselves? When we have a criminal that's out there, what kind of technology are we going to use to track that person down and to find them and to help us solve these cases? And lastly is training. One of the important parts from the very first day you get hired in as a police officer, your training never stops until you retire. That entire time, whether it's 20, 25, 30, 40 years, you're going to become the most trained police officer in law enforcement when you're in the city of Tempe. We have annual training. We have training, specialty training for our detectives that are involved in criminal investigations, and they become specialists. They become state experts that people across the state rely on to help put these bad guys away. The next slide. So just kind of rehashing some of the things, the challenges that we see. One of the things, what I enjoy about presentations or teaching is you learn more than you teach, actually. And for me, after reviewing this, some of the challenges that we see is that we know that our daytime population increases 46%, a little over 46%. One of the things that was talked about is, how are we reaching that 46%? We know that we're going into the schools, we're going into the neighborhoods, we're going to churches, we're going to groups, but that 46%, the tourism that comes into Tempe, how are we reaching them? You know, they may not have a favorable idea or a favorable opinion of the police department in their city or their country or their state, wherever they come from, when they come to visit Tempe, and if they unfortunately become a victim of a crime, how are we connecting with them to let them know that we're not like any other police department? You have a police department here that is unique. We have a city that's unique. So how are we reaching them? We have that's one of our challenges that we saw. The other thing is ASU, again, biggest university. You have 55,000 students. A lot of those are here in Tempe. They're a vulnerable population. that's a challenge for us. It's a unique challenge that we love. We love seeing these students around. The special events, again, we're a unique city. We're right in the heart of the Phoenix metropolitan area, a booming city that people want to come here to visit. They want to be part of what we have and what we get to see every day, even if it's for a weekend. How are we connecting with them? How are we keeping them safe? Economic development, it's a great thing, but it's a challenge thing that's coming as well with a different type of policing. We're doing vertical policing now. When we have officers that respond to these high rises, how are we doing that? Some of the training that we're implementing, some of the ideas that we're implementing. But these are things that we look out to the community and say, hey, help us be a part of this. Help us to become even a more effective law enforcement agency.
Okay. So in conclusion, we'd kind of like to remind you about a couple things. The first is how important community participation is. First and foremost, we ask that our citizens and visitors call 911 to report crime. You're the eyes and ears of the community, and if you don't call us, you also become the eyes and ears of the department. We will not be able to take action. So help us be co-policing, help us do community policing, and fight crime together.
The other thing is be engaged. I think by you being here today shows me that we have people in our city that want to be a solution to this, that want to help us find these criminals. Be engaged with the police department. Listen to us. We have social media. We have a Twitter platform. Our social media platforms are Twitter, Facebook. Follow us on Facebook. Like our things. Be part of that. Be engaged. Listen to the things that we put out, whether it's just a road restriction or whether it's we're looking for a certain individual. You're the eyes and ears, like Noah said. You're our eyes and ears that can help us do this. Whether you're in another city department, I can tell you we rely heavily on you for all kinds of things in solving crime. And you may not even know it, but we say your name, we say you by name in a lot of our meetings. That's how much you're engaged with us. And you may not know it, or your personnel may not know it, but as we talk about it, it excites us, it gets us ready for the future. So be engaged.
So part of that invitation to participate and to join in that effort is besides providing for the open data porthole where you can get to this data and look at it yourself, we also provide an intranet site called Community Crime Map. If you Google LexisNexis Community Crime Map, you can see crime in your neighborhood. You can analyze, get your neighborhood association, your crime watch group, your next door group, and actually take a look at crime and ask for our crime prevention folks to come out and interact and join us in that fight against crime by understanding the crime in your unique neighborhood. And we think that's a really important step to take to kind of take some ownership of your own neighborhood and pride in your own neighborhood. And we are more than happy to work side by side with you to bring crime down and to improve our clearance rates.
We're like no other city in the state of Arizona. We've said that, we'll say it again, and we'll continue to say it tomorrow and next week and 20 years from now. We're different. We need you to understand that. We need you to help us to spread that message that when it comes to these clearance rates, we're a different city. People come to our city. We're different. We're unique.
So one of the things, by virtue of being a unique city, we ask that you be aware of these inaccurate comparisons. Ask questions. Call us and ask us. Ask each other. Interact. Get the information, but be aware of some of the things we talked about today, and again, partner with us in that regard.
And lastly, help us solve crime. Everybody watches these detective shows, NCIS or CIS or whatever they are, and it's easy to solve a crime in an hour. We know in reality, it is very difficult sometimes to solve a crime. There's crimes out there that I still think about that to this day are unsolved, that I think, man, how are we going to solve that crime? There's families, there's victims that want us to solve crimes, and we can't do it without the community. We can't do it without you, and we're hoping you can help us to get involved.
Yep, I want to really point out that 86% rate where you're willing to call the police, that satisfaction rate, and because of that, we want to thank you personally for assisting us in fighting crime and for solving crime. That's a critical point to make, and we're in this together to make Tempe a safe place to live and work and play. Now we basically want to turn it over to you to get your ideas for acceleration, answer any questions, and receive any comments you have about our presentation.
Thank you. We have a question down here.
Thanks, Mike and Noah, and you guys are always great representatives of the police department and give us a really good perspective on what you face on a day-to-day basis, so I appreciate that. I'm really excited about this performance measure, so I just want to talk about it for a second because it exemplifies, I think, what the city's trying to accomplish with strategic management, and that is that we know that the police department isn't the only department that contributes to this performance measure. We know that we accept this performance measure as a city, and all of the departments are responsible for helping achieve it. But you're the sponsor department. You're the one that step forward and say, we will take the responsibility for achieving this performance measure. We know that you can't do it without the city court, without the city prosecutors, without the FBI's help, and that it's really a team effort. So I appreciate the fact that without making excuses, you guys came forward and said, we're willing to take this on. It's also difficult to get up there and talk about a performance measure that we're not meeting. But we understand that because you're not meeting it isn't a failure of your department. It's an opportunity for your department as the sponsor department to work with all of the people involved to say, why aren't we meeting this? Why aren't we achieving this goal? And there might be some opportunities to improve our system. And it also might point to a need to allocate more resources toward it. So I love the fact that you pointed out that we're an importer of jobs and people during the day, but you're not making an excuse. We know that the residents of Tempe expect crimes to be cleared. And if a lot of people are coming to the city, they're typically spending money here, which means they're giving us the resources to solve the crime. So I love the fact that you acknowledge that, the fact that people are coming to the city, but it's not an excuse. And when you got to the slide where you put up 6 strategies to solve this, none of them said, and we need more money. You looked at yourselves. No, no, but you looked at outcomes. You looked at training and things like that. Now, some of those might cost money, but you looked at what really needs to be achieved to reach the performance measure. And I appreciate all of that. So I guess having said all of that and the fact that you guys have stepped up, I just think this is it would have been easy for a department not to list this as a performance measure and say, this is really an inconsistent measure and we don't think it's beneficial, so let's skip it. But we know that even if it isn't the best measure, it might be a good measure for us to look at to allocate resources and to look internally. So I appreciate all that. So my question is, when the FBI says we collect a bunch of data and we produce a bunch of statistics but don't use them, is there any opportunity for us to work with the FBI to improve the consistency of reporting so that it might be more useful?
I'd say yes on 2 counts. One is they are revamping the FBI UCR program to do what's called NIBRS, which is the National Incident-Based Reporting System that captures all the crime, multiple events, building better RMS systems and dealing with some of that. And we're not due to go, I think Angelique's back there somewhere 2021. The state. There's a state law that says we have to participate, even though it's a voluntary program. So other cities, other states outside the Arizona don't necessarily have to participate. So some of that. Practices that are different for how a case goes forward varies from city to city. I think if the FBI provided some funding to research how that is and or support to make sure we're doing it similarly would be another step forward. I had another one, and I don't know, Mike, you want to
first off, thanks for everything you said. We take a lot of pride in our department. We really do. So I appreciate your comments. It means a lot to both of us and everyone in here. What I can tell you is one of the things that we can do is the best thing that we need is people to be educated on what these numbers really mean. You know, working with the FBI, they're going to report these numbers because that's just what they do. They catalog this crime and they're going to report it. People are going to use those numbers and because it's easy to be judged off a number. But what we try to do the best we can is to communicate and educate. And the FBI knows that. They're a great partner with us. And they're not trying to throw us under the bus. They're not trying to throw any agency under the bus. But what they have to do is they want to report these numbers. And so I think that's a great point, working with them, trying to find out a way. But I think what we can do internally is to help educate, to help understand what those numbers really mean. And everyone in here can help us with that.
The other point I wanted to make, as you saw, we only reported 2016 data, and we're already past 2017. So the timeliness of that data is an issue. But part of that's because it's an official federal kind of mandate, and they go through the Arizona Department of Public Safety manages it. The FBI looks at it. We haven't even released 2017 data. They haven't. One of the things we're doing about 4 years ago, we got a grant to begin to monitor this on a 28-day cycle, pay much more attention to it on a day-to-day, week-in and week-out basis. We meet once a month to do a crime suppression meeting to talk about those trends, things that are going up and going down. We use Stephanie's group and the GIS group who supports us excellently to be able to do crime mapping and hotspots, not only when are those crimes going up or going down, but is there a particular location, and we can react quicker. We can partner with neighborhood associations better, and I think funding for that, like that grant is an example where we can do a better job to be more, not only efficient, but that efficiency then turns into more effectiveness, and I think that's an important way the FBI or the federal government and partners with other city departments, whether it's public works, graffiti, things like that, that we work together, and then our partnership with the community and ASU for that matter is very valuable.
Thanks, Noah and Mike. Appreciated it. I really want to ask you about Coachella, but I'll ask you instead about with Tempe having, being such a great place for employers and for jobs that we create here in the community. You mentioned strategies that you're going to have to do to actually prevent crime and increase the reporting by those people visiting our city, whether for a job or for an event. What are your specific programs or services that you're putting into play to do that? Are they similar to what you did and had success with schools and neighborhood associations, especially for our large employers?
Yeah, so for example, we'll take State Farm. When State Farm came in, we knew that, hey, State Farm is going to be within our jurisdiction. Huge building, lots of people. What we did is the first thing that we have is the outreach. Even though the employees, we may not get to touch them personally and be able to get that contact, but what we do get is the management, the security. They know that the relationship is there. They understand the type of programs that we have within the city. We also provide training to these businesses. So for their employees, if they ask for a training, we have a unit that specifically will go out, meet with them, and provide training, whether it's, you name it, safety training, active shooter training, crime prevention tips. We have a crime prevention unit that also goes out, works with the ASU Police Department, the ASU school, the management as well, to see how do we get in with the students. A lot of them may not be here for a long time, but when they come to Tempe, we want them to understand how they can connect with us. Social media is a huge outreach that we get. Right now on our Twitter page, we got about 25,000 followers. We want to get more. We want people to be engaged with us, to be able to give us their comments. And a lot of people, when they come, I know for me, when I go to a city, I'll pull up their social media, see what kind of things are going on. Well, when they pull up the Tempe Police Department, they can see what kind of agency we are. The other outreach that we do is with the tourism office, working with the tourism and for big events that come here. But there are still things that I know we could use, ideas, and we're always open for that.
Hi, gentlemen, thank you very much. I do have a question. We have a crime prevention unit in the police department. Is the police department still really involved with doing safety security reviews before development? And also, does Tempe PD still invest in examining crime prevention through environmental design, otherwise known as SEPTED, to influence crime?
Yeah, absolutely, we do. We do a great job of that. So we have a crime prevention unit. With all the development coming in, we have an officer that's specifically assigned to the development of that are assigned to the development to help figure out through SEPTED or crime prevention, through environmental design, how are they going to interact with the department when there is crime? How can we work together to reduce crime? Great question.
I had a question, I guess, and I hope it doesn't betray my ignorance too much on this, but the question of daytime population affecting crime rates, we understand, and I certainly followed what you've said, and it's similar to what we've said in the past, which is, our bedtime population and our daytime population, there's a big difference between, it gets much larger. But the focus of this performance measure is on clearance rates. So whether or not you normalize our rates of crime, based upon daytime or nighttime, the question isn't how many crimes are committed per capita, but how many we clear after they're reported, right? The measure has to do with the solving of the crimes that we know about. So whether or not people feel comfortable reporting crimes to the city of Tempe, whether or not we do extensive social media outreach, all that stuff, that helps us to know and have people feel confident that the city of Tempe is going to take seriously the crimes that are committed within the city, right? That's one piece of it. The other piece of it is, once we are aware of something, what are we doing to make sure that we solve or at least clear a crime? Because clearance isn't the same as solving, right? Just because you clear a case doesn't mean that you've made an arrest. Isn't that true?
No, it does mean that. An arrest is a type of clearance.
The type of clearance.
There are other types that you can use, and a very small percentage of that would be an exceptional clearance. But most of our clearances are either a physical arrest, a booking, or a cite and release, which is in essence a summons, right?
So, for instance, if you submitted a case to the county attorney's office with a suspect that you've identified, let's say, and they determine that they're not going to file charges, is that considered a cleared crime?
Yes.
Okay.
For FBI purposes. I don't
That's-
think
that's what I'm
we're
getting-
happy
that's
about
what I'm
that,
getting at.
But clearly, in this particular metric, it does count. towards
Identifying,
clearance.
doing an investigation, identifying a suspect, and submitting that case to a prosecutorial agency clears a crime, even though it may not quote-unquote solve the crime, because part of what the public thinks about in terms of solving is somebody was ultimately tried and convicted for their crime, not just that we identified a suspect and it was submitted, right? I mean, that's a fair point, right?
It's a fair point, but a misperception about what a clearance is from a police department standpoint. A measure of the prosecutor's office might be what their rate of prosecution is, which we can't be held accountable for. Not that we shouldn't collaborate and work with them. We have partners with them.
Totally understand that,
But
Noah,
that's
but
an
I'm
important-
getting to a different point.
Okay.
And my different point is this, is when we talk about things like daytime population and the flaws in Part 1 crimes and how we look at those, that's a bit of a separate question than whether or not, once we understand the universe of crimes that the FBI is looking at, within that universe, how many of our cases are clear, right? We know what that number is, and we know that once we have a crime that's been reported to us and we investigate it, we either clear it or we don't clear it. And what you're telling me is that the number that we clear is below where we want to be. And that fact, how much of that disparity between what we know about and what we actually clear is due to the FBI and the way that they report crimes? I guess I didn't understand that. And how much of it has to do with process within the department?
Well, I would point out a couple examples, and I have really good numbers on that, but two other factors that go into that exceptional clearance is whether or not the prosecutor will actually take the case forward. That might be tied to witnesses that are willing to come back. So when we have all these tourists who are victims of crime and they go back to Michigan or Canada or wherever they go, and they won't show up for a hearing or be a witness or testify, then that case basically goes nowhere. We may not submit it because we can't find that person. Same thing with students who may not be willing to cooperate or aid in prosecution. So that gap between where we're at and where we'd like to be, part of that, I would argue, is probably in that window. We certainly want to do technology and training to get us better at that. But that would be one area that daytime population. We talked about it at command staff on Tuesday, but how do we reach that 46% increase that comes out? These are Phoenix residents. And we don't have right now a mechanism internally, I think, to go to neighborhood by neighborhood or in the water bill to educate people or to work with people that come here. Now, we might be able to partner with a State Farm or with ASU to do training, and that would be valuable. But how do we hit tourists? And maybe it's something we need to do with our hotels and our Chamber of Commerce to let people know, hey, be careful. You're vulnerable to a crime if you leave your items in a car, because that would get counted, or over drinking or going downtown or to a special event, making sure we provide ways that they get back safely to their hotel or back to their car. When we sponsor special events that would reduce that, but whether they're willing to aid in that prosecution, to be a part of that, is something that is a challenge for us, and that's where that difference might be.
And that's really, I guess, all I was trying to get at with my question, which is we can do a lot of things to make it less attractive for criminals to commit crime in Tempe. But assuming that an amount of crime is going to occur in Tempe, and we find out about it, and we investigate it, and we don't clear it, that is what we are talking about with respect to this performance measure, right? You can drive the overall rate of crime down, by all the things you talk about, CEPTED, or better education, or better outreach, or better understanding of ways to keep yourself safe from crime, to cause it to never happen in the first place. But for those that happen, and we find out about and investigate it, that's the area of this metric where I think it's 1.12 talks about, is the clearance of crimes that are reported to us, not the non-incidents of crimes that never happened in the first place. Right?
Yeah.
They're not the same thing. Okay. So once it happens, once a crime occurs and it's in Tempe, and we know about it, and we don't clear it versus the ones we do clear, part of it, like you said, maybe we have a suspect in mind, but we know the likelihood of conviction is low because all the witnesses are out of state or they refuse to cooperate, right? And that case may never get submitted because we just simply say we can't go forward. Now, we could submit that, and once we submit it, we get a rejection, but that would be sort of an artificial way, in a sense, to kind of try to drive up our clearance rates because we know no reasonable likelihood of conviction, right? But that's a process question. Is that fair?
Sure.
I mean, is that, you see what I'm saying?
I think Kim wants to respond.
Yeah.
It's a couple points. I think that when you talk about daytime populations or increase in populations, there's a certain percentage of cases that there is absolutely zero follow-up on. Maybe somebody goes to the movie theater and then they come out and their car's gone. They have no idea who took it. They can't provide you any information. There's no video about it. There's no witnesses. And so as the population increases and the number of reports increase, so does the number of cases out of those cases that are reported have absolutely no ability maybe to solve. So the solvability factors are just very limited. And so those go into a pile of inactive or never assigned cases, maybe never to be solved at some point in time. So daytime population, in effect, will have some impact on the number of cases that we get that just don't have enough solvability factors in order to assign and to get resolved. So there's an impact there in the types of cases that we receive. So I would say that may be one way. The other thing about the FBI, as far as the case clearances, they don't really manipulate data. They basically just receive data and then they push out data. And where I guess the variations occur is within each jurisdiction. It might be how they define unfounded. And sometimes you'll see newspaper articles and stuff where a jurisdiction had unfounded in numerous cases. We really didn't meet the unfounded criteria, but they had at one point in time decided to maybe go that direction, and that's how they defined it, and then they got to back up and change it. So the kind of flawed data going in is flawed data coming out. And so that will also affect the crime stats. And that's where you start getting into variables that you really can't, FBI can't control it. We can't control it. It's just how people exceptionally cleared, how they exceptionally clear a case. They might have their interpretation of that definition versus another agency. And so those are all things that across the U.S. become very difficult to control. But generally speaking, I think that using that as a criteria to judge is a good way for us to measure internally against ourselves to say, how do we become better? And how do we look at our data? Are we reporting it accurately? And continue to look at those kind of things to increase. So I think it's a good measure for us to use so that we can continue to compare against ourselves to try to improve our services. And I think that's where really the true benefit comes from those kind of comparisons.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that, Kim. You're right. I mean, this is not relative to other cities and how they may or may not accurately. I think we would take a lot of pride in that whatever numbers we report are the ones that we believe we're required to under the guidelines that are given to us by the FBI for crimes and for crime clearance, right? We would never attempt to achieve our goal by manipulating the manner in which we happen to report. That's not an honest way to drive up the statistics. What I guess I was getting at is the strategies that we talk about. For instance, you talked about someone walking out of a movie theater and seeing that their car isn't there anymore. I'm sure that happens, but I'm also sure that happens in Chandler. I'm sure that happens in Gilbert. I'm sure that happens in Scottsdale and Phoenix and Mesa. It happens here too. And can we say that it's a factor of our daytime population? In part, probably true, but it's also maybe that that's happened multiple times in an area. Getting back to the Chief Septet thing, if we knew that it was happening in a garage that had no camera, the question is, why is there no camera in there? If there are multiple times when someone's car is being stolen, and we have an opportunity to work with the property owner to say, let's increase video surveillance in this area so the next time it happens, we have the ability to actually, right? I mean, it spurs a conversation about what are the things you can do to help us solve these crimes or to prevent them from happening in the first place, which I think is a different conversation. So Yeah, it makes sense, I think.
And again, back to, again, those two factors. One that we talked about is part of that change is that the fact that we do have, different than these other communities, a 46% increase of people who come here, and that's just a larger number. And the other cities, Chandler and Gilbert, don't have that many people coming that are then vulnerable, or their property become, targets and special events and things that we have.
Totally.
Also, I think they don't have 85,000 or 55,000 ASU students, 10,000 freshmen who come for the first time that are also vulnerable, and it is our job to protect them and to provide public safety. Most of the other cities across the country don't have that. One of the things we're looking at as a strategy is, actually Mike and I are going in June to attend the Town and Gown Conference to try to partner with other universities to have an honest conversation about things they're doing, and maybe create some better benchmarks for cities like Tempe for what they do, how they do it, and compare ourselves to, rather than the kinds of comparison we saw in that article that really puts us, the methodology or other cities, that isn't an apples to apples comparison, to make us have the confidence we have that we're doing things right and we're meeting whatever that target might be. And that's just a smaller strategy. But it's, I think important that, we use these in a way that is a fair comparison and that makes sense for us because of our uniqueness.
Chief Moore.
So how has the police department withstood the pressure that's been really surfaced by our city manager to start submitting cases that may not have any solvability, that may not have a witness that is going to aid in prosecution? How has the police department withstood that pressure, maintained integrity because of this performance measure? Because one would argue that, boy, this sure is easy for you to achieve a performance measure. You just submit everything and then let the county attorney say we're not going to prosecute it. Because then, under your description, your solvability would be high. You would go from 35% to 90%, conceivably. So what are the mechanisms in Tempe that aid you as an organization to maintain your integrity, not to give in to just achieving a performance measure?
Well, I would say that there are agencies that have done that, that do that. Tempe is not going to do that. We're not going to create a workload that's unnecessary. We know that there are cases out there that we just don't have enough information. We don't have enough evidence. We don't have enough anything to present to the county attorney to have them turn that down. Could we do it? Absolutely. We could do that, but it's not the right thing to do. We're not an agency that's going to do that. We're not an agency that's going to create more work, unnecessary work, to the county attorney for them to have to deal with something that we're dealing with. I can tell you the other things that happen is when we recognize that there is something that we need to change to solve those crimes, we're doing it. We find those crime trends. We use our analysts. We use our detectives. We use our cops that are out on work in the street to find those patterns to solve those crimes as quick as possible. So when somebody says the clearance rates, it's not just about turning a case full of reports over to the county attorney to have them look at it and say, okay, we got 50 of these from Tempe this month. We're just going to clear them all out. It's easy, but that's not the right thing to do.
I think we're also very purposeful in what we do in terms of building cases, linking cases. The Crime and Intel Center, for example, we've had a number of cases, across jurisdiction, multi-jurisdictional, where we collaborate with MESA and that to really work on a case, build a crime series or pattern, and bring resources together to go after an individual or a group of individuals. And again, that's an example of how we do build better partnerships. We're not going to not do those things purposefully with the prosecutor's office just to make us look good. We're doing it because we're building a long-term relationship with that office, with Phoenix, with other departments, to really make sense out of policing, co-policing, community policing, and build that relationship. And the integrity of that, I think, is critical, that we have those long-term relationships and feel confident that our that we're living by those measures in an honest and with integrity, I guess.
Exactly. That's great. I mean, I really appreciate the presentation today. I mean, we talk about sort of bedrock things that communities are expected to do and do well. I mean, I can't imagine many more than what you've presented on today. You know, the feeling of safety in a community, whether you live here, whether you work here, whether you recreate in Tempe, is so vitally important, and that level of trust that communities feel with their police departments, I think, plays a huge role in that. So, you know, I applaud you for tackling this head on, and wish you nothing but the best. And, you know, I know that the feedback from your fellow employees and others in the community is going to be a vital part of how you continue to address this. So thank you. Well done. All right, and we will see you again on May 10th. We will have 2 presentations on that day. Looking forward to it. Thank you.